Here's a really fascinating tweet that I just came across on X. My mom died when I was 11. Recently, I was contacted by someone on Facebook who interviewed her for her dissertation and had found the tape recording. So this weekend, I've heard her voice for the first time in more than 25 years. That post on X really intrigued me because as I make this video, we're right at the tail end of the LA wildfires of 2025. Those disasters wiped out significant portions of Pacific Palisades and Altadena and cost billions of dollars in damage. So many people in my circle got evacuated, and a handful also lost their homes. In the composer community, there was a story about the son of the famed composer Arnold Schoenberg. He lost his house and along with it 100,000 or more artifacts of his famous dad's work. And if you're interested to read more about the Schoenberg case in particular, I'll leave the link down below. Closer to home, my colleague Star Parodi, a wonderful composer, lost her historic Steinway grand piano, which originally came from the MGM scoring stage, where it was probably played by the likes of George Gershwin and Irving Berlin and was a part of The Wizard of Oz. It's part of Hollywood history. And all of this happening in our community really made me think about the archival process and how we can preserve those things that are most precious to us. Now, obviously, there's some things that just can't be preserved. That Steinway is irreplaceable. But I just happen to have done a significant amount of archival work within my own family. At various times, I've found ways that I can preserve photos and audio and video and documents and more. So I figured it's probably worth making a video about this because there's a lot of interesting steps along the way. One of my biggest projects was compiling hundreds and hundreds of letters written over decades into this book for my family to enjoy in the future. So in this video, I'll show you some of the tips and tricks that helped me create this. And I've even got a few tips and tricks beyond that that can help you take some of your memories and augment them with the latest AI tools. After I read that original X post that I started the video with, it seemed like this would be something worth sharing because there's so many little things to know when you're taking on a project like this. So I'm going to chapterize this video. You'll see the timestamps down below if you want to look at photos or documents or videos or whatever it is. And then once you're done with all your archiving work, I also want to touch on the topic of backups because it's really important after you've done all this preservation work to make sure that work isn't lost. Now, before I dive into the details of this, I do want to also mention there are commercial services out there on the web that can do all kinds of digitizing for you. And if you just want it done for you and want to ship it off to them for their rates, go ahead and do it. This video is focused on how you can do it yourself if that's what you want to do. So if you're ready, let's dive in. I'm going to start with photos, which is probably one of the simplest things that you can digitize. I've been left with literally thousands of photos in my garage, usually in old photo albums, and I really wanted to find a way to preserve those because those photo albums take up so much space and nobody's opened them for years. So my opinion here, I've actually decided to gut these photo albums and remove the photos out of them because I realize that's the easiest way to scan them, and the photo albums might get partially harmed in the process anyway, and no one's likely to open these ever again. So it's better just to remove the photos out of them. Now, as far as the actual scanning of the photos, you can buy pre-built devices for this. Those make the job easy if you want to spend the money, but I personally opted for an even simpler approach, and that is simply to scan them with my phone. There are a good number of photo scanning apps in all the app stores, and they all pretty much do the same job. I'll leave a couple of links down below. I choose to use one called Photo Scanner Pro, and all I have to do is point my camera at the photo on a flat surface, and the app will automatically detect the corners of the photo, reorient things, and crop it and enhance it. So using a tool like that, it is actually pretty quick to get through photos. Now there is one little asterisk on this, and that is that lighting makes a big difference. And if you try and photograph a dark, glossy photo, that's actually one of the hardest things to do because the reflections go haywire. My personal trick for recapturing photos like that is to be in a moderately dark room and then side light the photo. That way, all the reflections are off to the side where they aren't picked up by the camera. And then after I've made my way through a stack of photos, my app helpfully lets me dump them all into my photos library in iCloud. And one thing I like to do once those photos are saved into my photos library is I'll open them up in Apple Photos on my laptop, and then I'll select them and I'll issue that command so I can reassign their date and time. That ensures that they at least appear somewhat chronologically correctly. Of course, it's pretty unlikely to get that date exactly right, so I've developed a little shorthand where I just assign it to January 1st of the approximate year that that photo was taken. And I know that everything in my photos library that's more than a decade or two old is an approximate date, but at least it appears roughly chronologically correctly for my enjoyment. So that's how I deal with photos. Stay tuned. Later in this video, I'm going to show you some interesting AI tools that you can use to augment those photos. Next, let's talk about digitizing audio cassettes, the same type that were mentioned in that original X post. And this is pretty close to my heart because I've got stacks and stacks of cassettes in the garage that are physically degrading and I'd like to be able to save them. Now, hardware-wise, of course, you're going to need a cassette deck. And if you don't already have one, there's basically two avenues you could go through. One would be to get a USB cassette recorder. I haven't personally played with specific models, but I see plenty on Amazon that should do the job. Links will be left down below if you're going to go try some of those. The other option would be to find a used cassette player. I'm sure you can find one at a thrift store or Goodwill pretty easily. And then you'd still need an interface to get that into your computer. So look at an audio interface if you're going to go that route. So once you've got that cassette player playing cassettes and coming into your computer, you just need to hit play there and you need to capture it in your computer. If you're not experienced at that, you can use free tools like Audacity or GarageBand. I'll leave links down below. And those programs can just act as a recorder. They can just record the incoming audio off the cassette so you can preserve it. And I do think if you're going to go this route, you might want to investigate a little bit of audio cleanup and denoising kind of stuff because it makes the audio sound a whole lot better. I have two recommendations to make in this area. One is Supertone's Clear plugin, which does a really masterful job of very simply isolating dialogue, speaking, from anything that's not dialogue, and also giving you the capability to dial down the room or the reverb. So using this tool, you can take a very ambient recording and suddenly make it much more polished and listenable and coherent. The other recommendation I would make in this area would be iZotope's RX series. And if you're budget-minded, you could even go with the entry-level RX Elements product. RX Elements has the most important components, denoising, declicking, that kind of stuff. And you can find it in iZotope's web shop for usually between $49 and $99, although, top secret, I have occasionally found it on crazy sales like on Black Fridays as low as $19, which is a steal for what it is. So I find the value of those denoising and audio cleanup tools to be very, very high because you are rescuing lower quality audio and you want to be able to preserve it in the best possible quality. So once you're done with all that digitizing, it's pretty easy for your audio recorder to spit out the final file where you've cut off the beginning and the end and you've cleaned up the audio and it's just exactly the way you want to preserve it. Now, how about vinyl records? Those can be worth preserving if you got something really unique that hasn't been digitized by a record company or something like that. The process is pretty similar to cassettes. You're going to need to find a record player. They do make USB record players. They can be fine at the entry level or even the kind of mid-level quality. Good enough for most people, not professional level. If you want professional level, then you want a good turntable and a good audio interface to do that digitizing. But if you're okay with, generally good enough quality stuff, you can do well with just a USB turntable off Amazon. I'll make some recommendations down below. And then similar to cassettes, you put the record on, you hit record on the computer, and you let the thing play in so it can be digitized. Now, again, those recommendations for noise reduction plugins will come in very useful. If you're just digitizing speech, then Clear is probably enough for you. If you want the ability to decrackle a vinyl record and things like that, then you're going to want to look into the RX suite, which has more options available for that kind of thing and can get you better results. Okay, now let's move on to VHS cassettes. For this, obviously you're going to need a VHS player. These are a dime a dozen in classifieds or in thrift stores. You can get one for like $10 just about anywhere. And then you're going to need a little bit of hardware to take the output of the VHS player and be able to bring it into your computer. For this, the easiest solution would be to use a USB capture card like the one I'm showing here, and I'll leave some recommendations down below too. Now, all of these devices that I've mentioned to this point, these are not things you'd want to use if you're curating historical artifacts at the Smithsonian, but I think they're plenty good enough for family memories and things that, they're not the greatest quality to start with. They're probably deteriorating, but it can be really beautiful to be able to preserve them. Okay, staying in the world of video, let me cover quickly how to digitize a DVD. If you have a DVD that needs to be saved. This is not too hard. This is very straightforward. First of all, you need an optical drive. A lot of modern computers don't have optical drives anymore, but they are pretty cheap to find. Again, Amazon links will be found down below. So once you have an optical drive and you've connected it to your computer, you're going to want to download the free utility Handbrake. Handbrake is a DVD ripper. and it can take any scenes on a DVD and convert them to video files that can then be stored digitally. There's a lot of options and technicality in Handbrake. I generally stick with the presets, and I'll choose one of the higher quality presets like I'm showing here, because by default, Handbrake will never upscale to a higher resolution. It'll always go at the resolution you ask it for, or lower if the source resolution is below that. So now I've basically covered most of the video sources that you might want to digitize. And I'll just mention that once you have that final video file, you're going to want to store it somewhere. And even though I'll cover universal backup solutions later, also remember you can simply upload it to YouTube if you want. YouTube is free, and if you're concerned about privacy, you can make the videos private or unlisted, and no one will ever see them except for the people you give access to them. Okay. Now I'd like to spend a little more time unpacking the topic of scanning documents, scores, written letters, things like that, because that's what ultimately led me to the production of that big book that I mentioned, and I really want to tell you about all the steps it took to make this book a reality. See, I have family members who have left a significant amount of junk in my garage. One day I was cleaning it out and I found dozens and dozens and then hundreds of letters that were written by my family as we were spread out across 3 continents during my childhood. And they've been sitting in boxes. Some of them were on fax paper even, that waxy paper that really deteriorates over time. So some of them had faded to the point where they were almost illegible. And I realized that no one had been in these boxes for so many years, and no one was ever likely to go back in the boxes. If they did, they'd probably just go back for one letter and find it a curiosity and then leave it for another day. So because I have a thing for these things, I decided to start scanning them. And somewhat similar to my photo project, I just decided the easiest way to handle all these fragile documents, some of them in weird sizes, weird shapes, that kind of stuff, was by scanning it into an app. There are a large number of apps that can do this in the app stores. I chose to use Scanner Pro, which did an excellent job. And just like scanning photos, it has the ability to auto-detect the corners of the document as you're photographing them. And then it also detects the type of document you're scanning so that it can enhance it. For example, once it sees it's a black and white document, it maxes out that contrast so that all of the text is nice and clear and legible. So I started down this path when I found, a decent sized stack of several dozen letters, and I was like, these seem important. I'd like to preserve these. And then by the time I got to the bottom of the boxes, I scanned 600 pages. Now, if you were alive during the 80s and 90s and, the pre-email time, you'll know that when we wrote letters, we always put the date in the corner. And that made me go, that would be kind of fun. So once I had all of those letters scanned, I started the process of organizing them in date order. This is pretty easy to do using Apple Preview, where you can grab pages and you can just simply drag them to a new location and save, and that PDF is now saved in that order. So as this project unfolded and then multiplied and grew and eventually got to 600 pages, I realized, yes, it's nice to have these all as a PDF, but they would also make a really beautiful gift book for my family. So then I started the process of how can I make this into a printed book? Now that process was a little more tricky than you might imagine. For starters, when the app was scanning all those pages, they're all at different dimensions. Some are tall, some are wide, some have corners missing, all kinds of stuff. And when you send a PDF to a printer for printing in a book, you can't have that. You need to standardize those sizes. So I ended up using a bunch of AI to figure out how to get those pages reformatted. And through this entire process, I was really skittish about having to buy a couple $100s of a PDF editor software that I was literally going to use once. So wherever possible, I tried to find free or very simple solutions to do the formatting work that I needed. And fortunately, PDF is such a universal format that there's a lot of utilities and code out there to reformat it to make it what you need it to be. So I started by using the service pdf24.org to standardize every page in the PDF to US letter size. So what that service did was it looked at either the width of the page or the height of the page, and it maxed out whichever one maxed out the page first, and then centered it so that it would look right once printed. So I found this was the easiest way to just kind of standardize sizes, and it worked very, very well. Now the next thing I needed to do was add a bleed area, because once I found the company that was going to print it for me, details on that in a minute, I realized that you can't have content that goes edge to edge because the printer actually needs a bleed margin around the sides of the page in order to make sure that the content of the page doesn't overrun. So this proved to be a little more tricky than I was anticipating. I actually used 3 of the major AI engines, ChatGPT, then Claude, then Grok. Each of them gave me pieces of the puzzle, but only Grok was able to solve it because what I needed to do was to shrink each page to about 97% of its size and then center it on the page. And this was eventually accomplished through GhostScript and some code that Grok wrote for me. So that was the adventure I went on to get that PDF print ready. Then I designed a cover. I used Pixelmator Pro to make it, but you could use something like Canva. And then I researched companies that could actually print up this PDF for me. Now, there are a lot of companies out there that can do this printing for you. I researched a bunch of them. I ended up choosing one. I'm not saying it's the best, but they did do a very good job for me. I went with Barnes & Noble, the venerable booksellers. They've got a special service where you can upload your PDF, upload your front and back cover, make some choices as far as paper and binding and so on, and then you can custom order your book. You're probably wondering how much it costs to print a 600-page book like this. Well, it's not that expensive. This hardcover cost me about 20 bucks. The paperback variation cost me about 15. Now, both of those books did take a while to print. I ordered in the holiday season and my wait was almost a month. But at the end of the process, I got this beautiful book of 600 pages of family letters, all sequenced in chronological order, all nicely printed to a book that can sit on a shelf and is actually readable instead of the mess that used to be in my garage. So I'm really proud of how this book turned out, and I really hope that these tips are helpful to you if you're tackling some kind of archival project like me. In fact, I'm looking at this book going, maybe I should print up some of my scores like this because it's really nice and it's not expensive. Anyway, I'm sure I'm leaving a lot out because I'm just chronicling my journey of salvaging all of these archival things and finding ways to digitize them. If you have more tips, I would love to hear them. Of course, put them in the comments below. 2 more things I want to cover because they're all related to the topic of what I'm talking about, and that is AI. There's some really incredible AI tools out there that can do some really interesting things. Totally is an experimental fun thing. I started messing around with Kling AI, which offers a neat service where you can upload a still photograph like this one, then give it a text prompt and it will animate the video for you. So let me give you a couple of really interesting examples. So I uploaded this photo of me playing the piano when I was about 16 years old with my friend Sarah. And I gave it the prompt, colorize then animate the singer and piano player. And for some reason it ignored my request to colorize it, but it did turn out this beautiful animation, which I find kind of funny because in real life Sarah's face doesn't really look like that, and I know that and she probably knows that. But the piano playing looks pretty realistic and it really does take me back to that time. Here's another example of me playing the drums when I was about, 10 years old, and I gave it the prompt, animate this video of the child playing the drums. And you'll see this one is a little less successful. It doesn't quite look real, but you know what? Props that it perfectly preserved that Hall & Oates album cover sitting in the lower left-hand corner. This AI-generated video is actually one of my favorites. I gave it this still black and white of me playing the piano where my fingers are not visible. And then I gave it the prompt, animate this person playing the piano, and just look at these results. In fact, I have a pretty good idea of what I was playing in this photo. It's probably Gershwin's First Prelude, and I just happen to have a cassette of me playing that piece, which I can now use as the soundtrack to this video. Pretty cool. Here's another example I tried that shows some of the shortcomings of the AI algorithms. Again, it's me playing the piano. Sorry if I'm getting a little boring here. I gave it the prompt, animate this photo of the piano player. And if you look real close, fingers are not very well rendered. This is one thing that the present crop of AI video generation engines are not doing particularly well. They really struggle to render convincing limbs, fingers and legs and things like that. And here's another one it failed at. This is my high school marching band with the prompt, make the individual members of this marching band move around the field in a marching formation. And you'll see for a few moments they do move in a vaguely marching band formation until they inexplicably multiply. So that one was kind of fun. Last example I'll give you, I have very fond memories of my childhood library, and I found some old historical photos of the library which I vividly remember spending many, many hours as a child in. So I fed this photo to Kling, and I gave it the prompt, bring this library to life by adding people moving and reading books. Now I don't quite know why it felt the need to speed this up so much, but you can see some of the detail is not quite there, and ultimately this video is not really usable in any practical sense, but I did still enjoy creating it, and I'm having a lot of fun with these AI algorithms. I'm also going to touch on one other AI topic in this video, and that is the topic of bringing voices back to life. You've probably heard that there are algorithms out there that if you have an example of someone's voice, and you feed it into the engine, you can then make that voice talk. Well, since I've been resuscitating all this old material, I decided to see if that actually worked. So I played around with 11 Labs text-to-speech generator. Now on this one, I did have to pay for a $5 a month plan in order to unlock the feature that lets you sample a voice at a basic voice quality. Then I followed the directions to upload an audio file of me speaking, and then I typed out the text that I wanted the engine to say. This is a test of my own voice, synthesized, and now artificially generated. And here's what 11 Labs came up with.
This is a test of my own voice, synthesized, and now artificially generated.
So it was an interesting attempt. You can probably hear the similarity against my live voice right now. It wasn't absolutely perfect, but it was kind of interesting. And I could see how a tool could be very interesting if you did have a recording of someone who's no longer available, and then let's say you had a letter that they wrote and you wanted to OCR it and have them read it aloud to you. That is now in the realm of possibility. And my opinion is it's working. It might not be absolutely perfect, but it's kind of 70, 80, and sometimes even 90% there. So it's a really interesting tool, and it will only get better from this point forward. I do feel obliged to mention that these tools really need to be used ethically. It's not right to take someone's voice from the past and now put words in their mouth that they never said or would have said, and then use that for your own purposes. But really, the entire thrust of my video today is more about preserving memories and creating ways for those memories to stay alive. So I hope you hear this in the spirit that I intended. Okay, the last thing I want to touch on in this video is if you go to the trouble of digitizing any or multiple of these sources, and now you've got all those files sitting on your hard drive, I sure hope you got backups, because these are the kinds of things that we would want to pass down to our families. And if the worst happened, like the LA fires we just had, I think it's a no-brainer to invest a small amount of money to make sure that they can be kept forever. So I have just a few major backup services to recommend. If you're in the Apple ecosystem, iCloud works just great. Pay for enough of your storage, and you can store your files either in iCloud Drive or in the Photos app, or both. If you are a Google or a Gmail fan, you can upgrade your Google Drive at a minimal cost and then store a lot of these files in the cloud. If you're comfortable with Dropbox, Dropbox is roughly equivalent with Google Drive in terms of price and features, works in a slightly different way, but the end goal is exactly the same. And then one other tool that I would be remiss if I didn't mention would be Backblaze. Backblaze is cloud storage, but it's really whole computer storage. They charge one flat fee to back up your entire computer and everything on it. Now your access to it is a little more limited. It's not as simple as just a cloud drive where you can drag things in and out of it, but it does back up your entire computer, and you can retrieve files through the web interface or through the downloader or through a hard drive mailed to you anytime you need it. I've used Backblaze on my computers for many years. I consider it absolutely indispensable because it backs up everything I work on the computer at all times. And I have that peace of mind that everything is backed up off-site. I do want to mention that all the services I just mentioned are dependent upon a monthly or an annual subscription fee. And since the whole topic of this video is like long-term memories and lifelong stuff, I do encourage that whatever system you decide to store your files in, you make sure that your loved ones also have access or have the keys, perhaps in your will or in your trust, to get access to all of these memories if you're no longer here. Because that'd be a real shame for you to go to all this work and then find that the keys are no longer around for others to enjoy. Okay, that's it. I'm sure I probably left out a ton of services and ideas and tips that would be valuable. These are really just the ones that I've come across in my personal journey of archiving older material. So please leave your comments down below and feel free to reprimand me on everything I forgot. If there's enough major ones, maybe there'll be a part 2 to this video in the future. But in the end, I had just been through so many mini journeys of researching and investigating and putting to use some of these tips that I thought it was useful to collate them all into one video. Please make sure to like and subscribe to the channel. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope it was helpful to you. And I hope you're able to hit save on some of these priceless memories that might be in your garage or in your archives. Thanks for watching. I'll see you on the next one.